Welcome to New York State Association of School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is Understanding the Roots of the Crisis webinar. Your host for today's program is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development for New York ASBO. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. You may send chat questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. I will now turn the call over to our speaker. Donna, you may begin.
Thank you, Heather, and welcome everyone to the first day of June. Hope you all had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. And Kieran Dumfrey, who's the School Business Executive for Niagara Wheatfield, has put together this presentation to help understand the roots of this financial crisis that we are in. And certainly thank Kieran for putting this together. And this is the first of the 3 webinars of the General Principles online course. And the coursework is online, and many of you have taken these courses before, so you know where the conference room is and where to locate the activities that you're required to do. So thank you for attending, and Kieran, it's all yours.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I'm Kieran Dumfrey. As Donna mentioned, I'm a business manager up here, upstate, if you're downstate or in your neck of the woods. And I put together a presentation here. There's certainly enough written about it and enough speculation on it that what I have to say here will be somewhat maybe news to you, or some of it's going to be stuff you've heard before, but you know, this was a pretty scary event in the history of our country. It's the worst recession since the Great Depression, which is a legend in this country's history as being a very tough time for people to get through. And for a lot of people today, it's not a joking matter. It's a very tough time for a lot of people to get through, and it's cost them their jobs, their homes, and a good way of life. And what caused it usually is considered the incredible amount of failures in what was being sold as reliable assets to banks, to other countries, to financial institutions that were not worth as much as what they were rated to be. And when that bubble collapsed, there was a panic. The causes, the outline of the discussion, I was going to talk about 5 things. One would be the immediate causes that we can pinpoint about the global fiscal crisis, what happened, maybe why it happened, and how it impacted the economy here and around the world, what the federal government has done so far about it, and what the continuing impact on the federal government is because of this, how it really hit New York State particularly hard, more hard than any other state, and when some people think we may return to normal, if we ever come back to a situation as rosy as what the past was. Looking from today, it appeared rosy when we were getting our state aid checks if you're a school business manager. The causes of the global fiscal crisis, most people agree on. One of the things that really got it going was a prolonged credit easing after the dot-com bust, that in order to stimulate the economy after the dot-com bust in '99 and after the following bust associated with 9/11, interest rates were kept very, very low for a very long time. Even though the economy was started to do well, they were still kept low. This created, in effect, a housing bubble because credit was easily available to more and more people than ever before. And how that financing was made available to people was done through some amazing financial innovations, which we've never seen before, and I don't think the government or the banks were familiar with or ready for in all cases. And in particular, we've heard about subprime mortgage instruments as being one of the culprits that gave way during this time. And also, the first question that comes to people's minds, if you're a business manager or if you've got an accounting background, is what happened to the accounting controls? Why didn't they see this coming, and why didn't they head it off or warn us more? So we'll go through those 5 things. Here's the prolonged credit easing. I don't think it was quite that easy, but people were given loans, and I don't know if you remember being around then. If you've got a 0% or a 1.9% credit card offer in the mail, or a second mortgage offer in the mail just about every day during the early part of this decade of around 2003, 2004, there was an awful lot of stimulation of credit. In retrospect, people call a lot of these loans that were given out predatory loans, because they were given to people even with not very much concern about whether they could pay back or not, with really more concern about if they missed a payment, would the rates go up to 30%, or really how they could make money in addition to just lending it at a ridiculously low rate. And here you see from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis what the federal loan rate was during those times. And you can see during 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, the interest rates were right around 1% that the Fed was issuing when it was lending money to banks. So banks, in turn, could turn around and lend that to people and mark it up by 1% or 0.9% and still make money. Now, as the economy heated up, it got back to where it normally is, which is normally it's around 5%. But because of this recession we went into, they had to force that rate back down to stimulate the economy and get people to borrow and spend money. Credit easing and its effects. The monetary policy in the U.S. and other Western countries was brought on by credit being eased aggressively because of the dot-com bubble. They wanted to stimulate the economy. The rates in the U.S., as we just saw, reached 1% in 2003, which is, unless you're in a very big recession like we currently have been, it's almost unheard of. And the monetary excess during this time from 2002 to 2006 led to the housing boom. And when you had that boom, obviously asset prices started going up, and demand exceeded domestic output. Everybody wanted to buy a house. They saw a house as not only something to live in, lots of cases, they saw it as a great investment. This stimulated it even more. People were buying second homes. People who would never buy a home bought a home. And they were often told by real estate agents they could turn around and sell it for a profit if they waited a couple of years. And this mirrored, on the other end, a large growing debt, which people and banks put onto themselves over that period. Banks had more and more outstanding loans, and people had more and more outstanding credit that they had to pay back. And Tom Tolles, who used to be with the Buffalo News, he's now with, I think, the Washington Post. He did this cartoon to show how credit can be dangerous. There's something in plastic they've found that's dangerous, and especially when it gets overheated. And that brought about all this free credit, or low-priced credit, brought about the housing bubble. You get your balloon mortgage, free balloon mortgage inside, which, basically you could buy a house with a mortgage, pay only the interest maybe for the first year, or even more in some cases. And then when the principal and interest came due, you may not be able to, you may come to the sudden realization you can't afford this house any longer. And unfortunately, these bubbles happen throughout history. They happened with the internet bubble, where the stocks for the dot-com businesses went sky high. You know, if you ever took economics, they may have studied the tulip bubble, that was one of the first bubbles, where people in Holland were spending hundreds of dollars for tulip bulbs because everybody thought tulips were the greatest thing going. That was 500 years ago, but we still have bubbles. In 2006, the Yale economist Robert Shiller created the following graph that I'm going to show on the next page to illustrate the irrational exuberance of the U.S. housing market. He's since written a book that was kind of a bestseller called Irrational Exuberance. And it showed a spike in housing prices from the late 90s to 2006. And this spike coincided with the practice of issuing mortgages with no or little down payment, and something unheard of in the past, very little proof of ability to pay. You just said you were able to pay, and that could be enough for these people selling them. And you can see over history, he charted it for 100 years, housing prices never went as high as they did during the early part of the 2000s. That they just had a run-up that was unimaginable. That it was a run-up in prices that was double what anybody would expect to happen. And here's the graph. It was later adapted by him to show after that boom in the late 2000s that by 2010 they came back to where they normally were. Now, we didn't see this in Western New York, but if you were living in California or Florida, maybe you see these people on TV or read about them where they don't pay their mortgage because their mortgage is twice the amount the house is worth. And there's a lot of stories like that, but this was a phenomenon that happened in the boom areas, of our country. Primarily, it didn't happen, in areas that were more stable to as great a degree. So this was a housing tsunami. Low mortgage rates stimulated the demand for housing, and you had a historic low Fed funds rate where the Fed would give money to banks at a very low interest rate. Federal policies promoted home ownership. I mean, there's enough blame to go around all over. Greed, speculation, and lack of personal responsibility accounts for some of it too. I would have to think that people sold homes to people who they knew couldn't afford them in some cases. Causes could be the financial innovations that went on in that time. You had and a financial innovation is the act of creating and then popularizing a new financial instrument. And they came up with these instruments. No down payment, no principal payments for a year mortgages. And because they were issuing all this debt that really wasn't that good, they created these new investment vehicles, which were mortgage-backed securities or collateralized debt obligations, where they resold the mortgages to people who thought they were buying a good investment. That it was like they were buying a bond that would pay so much a year in interest. It wasn't truly understood by all investors. In some cases, the normal collateralized debt obligations that banks buy and sell would be bought and sold by banks, and when a bank would see it that they bought 100,000 different mortgages from another bank, they would strip off the ones that were very low rated, the ones that had bad credit rating people owning these homes, and they would rebundle them and sell them to other people, and they would be unaware they were buying these toxic assets. And the global impact, the subprime mortgage-backed securities, which is what the toxic assets were called, They were in portfolios and hedge funds around the world. The investments turned out to be far worse than people thought they would be. They thought they were getting a good deal because they were paying a discounted price for these securities, but when the bubble burst in housing, people couldn't afford to pay their mortgages on these houses, and they became almost worthless. They were down to 20% of their value pretty quickly. And that meant that credit dried up. And when you get in a situation like this, banks go from shoveling money out the door, as we saw in that cartoon, practically speaking, to the fact that they won't lend money to anybody unless the person can prove they don't need the money. So it's very hard to get the credit going again. And here you see Ben Bernanke and Treasury Secretary Paulson during the last year of the Bush administration trying to deal with the toxic assets with their TARP program. They went to Wall Street and bought all these worthless securities on homes that mortgages had failed on. Subprime is a loan under conditions which make the risk higher than a prime. You know, you might go to the bank and they'll tell you the prime rate on that mortgage is whatever, 5%. If you don't get the prime rate, you're going to pay more than that. And but instruments were made to make this more attractive to people. They wouldn't pay the down payment. They'd be able to afford it for the time being. And here you see what happened during that time period. Usually, subprime mortgages and subprime loans are almost non-existent in the banking industry. During this time, from 2000 to 2007, $2.7 trillion was issued in these subprime loans. If you look, there were more subprime mortgages issued than excellent credit mortgages. It was a phenomenon that was never seen before, and I don't think we'll ever see it again. And that put a lot of the banks in jeopardy in this country. And here you see the foreclosure rates on homes. The red area is the worst area, and they would be the boom towns. And some of the areas like up in the Adirondacks and the Southern Tier in Western New York, they actually had very, very, very few foreclosures because their value never ran up. Accounting control weaknesses were due to the fact that executives influenced the accounting, and they influenced their boards, and they influenced the selection of auditors. Accounting standards were words, and the meanings of words were sometimes manipulated. These were new types of transactions also that these auditors were examining. They weren't used to seeing these types of transactions the way they were being handled. They were innovative, and they didn't value them maybe as properly as they should have because they didn't realize the true risk involved. And they were extremely complicated. Buyers didn't understand them either. And there's another Tom Tolles cartoon. I think it's leveled at the investment banks. Over the years, the banks have challenged the accounting rules and asset valuations, and they've really gotten their way quite often by exerting pressure on both the government regulators, and sometimes when you hear there's too much regulation and this country's being strangled by regulation, you have to look and read between the lines to see that maybe they're not talking about seat belts here. Maybe they're talking about what's keeping them from making a killing and a fast buck. And here you see the political contributions in 2008 from the investment firms, which adds up. The impact on the economy. I don't know if anybody had in my case, it would be the 403B. If people would say, don't open it. if you don't want to get sick to your stomach, don't open it during the times during like 2008, 2009 when the stock market was in free fall. An enormous amount of wealth was wiped out. Not just the wealth of home values, the wealth of investments. It was a trying time. And as we talked about, sales of homes beyond owners' means, when the balloon mortgage payment came due, created mortgage delinquencies and destroyed the value of the subprime instruments. This created a crisis or a panic in the financial institutions that held them. And that triggered a credit crunch, which in turn froze credit and spurred on the recession since December '07. And it's still very hard for most people to get a loan compared with what it was like before then. With no more ability to extend credit and with banks clamoring for repayment, consumers lost quite a bit of their purchasing power as the bill on all their debt came due. So, the idea in the past, people would say, well, I'll pay off this credit card with another credit card. The party's over. That's a dead way to do business now. And the loss of personal wealth in 2008, as it's obviously gone back up, but it's still quite a significant loss. If you look at who was borrowing money, look at 2008, the federal government stepped in to stimulate the economy and to bail out companies, to repurchase toxic assets, and they ended up being the biggest credit holder going, as opposed to what they were before, just marginal compared to state and local governments and individuals. If you look at the job losses, this was a very, very steep loss of jobs. The effect on the economy when credit seized up and when people stopped spending because their discretionary income was gone or they had lost their job, it caused and still causes an awful lot of pain in the employment figures. You can see where we are on the path to economic recovery. We're starting to have positive numbers where the people getting unemployment or going off on unemployment is less than the number of new jobs for a few months recently, but the people who lost their jobs over the last 2 years plus, by and large, many of them are still without a work. So it's going to take a long way to get up there. If you look at this graph, people unemployed for 27 weeks and over is unbelievably high. You can see that spike to the right. This has had the longest impact on people since, as we said before, the Great Depression. The federal budget in 2020, these are projections. What's going to happen here? The deficit, they just project going up and up and up to match the spending that we're committed to because of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and the interest on all the debt that's being issued to pay for these, to pay for the stimulus, to pay for the government programs when taxes are way down because people aren't making the money. The response of the federal government, that's the next section we're going to talk about. Here you see the banks and some of the big businesses that were too big to fail. They got back up on the bike. They're back in business, but they really socked a wallop to the government. The government had to come up with all that money, and it's put itself into a huge deficit position doing that. I don't know if you remember this headline or this cover of The Economist, but it was a pretty scary time. There was really a great deal of uncertainty. I mean, the stock market really went down to 6,000 something or close to it because there was no idea how bad this thing was going to get and how long it was going to last. It was the worst crisis since the Great Depression and the longest U.S. recession. And what happened? The government stepped in and said, we can't let this continue. There was the bailouts began. There was the toxic asset repurchase program. GM was kept in business. The banks were all kept in business, and housing was propped up as best as possible, all by the federal government with the stimulus money and the TARP money. It's between what the Federal Reserve has borrowed or lent to people and what the government's handed out. You know, we're talking trillions of dollars. Some people estimate that this could be in the neighborhood of $11 trillion, which is unimaginable. It's uncharted water, really, what we've been going through. And here's a conservative look at what they see the bailout as being: 1.7 trillion in loans to companies, 3 trillion of investments where they bought stock. You know, you don't think of GM as being owned by the federal government, but basically that's the situation. And guarantees of bonds, money market funds, they stepped in. If you remember, the FDIC raised the insurance on deposits up to, I think it was $250,000 from $100,000, because people were afraid. They were taking their money out of banks. It was there were bank panics in certain areas of this country. People were using their electronic banking to clear out their accounts. Here you see currently, this is a very recent graph. It shows the money that's been given to corporations and what's been returned. The dark part of the graph, the darker color, is what's been returned. So you can see the banks are by and large paying back the money plus interest, and except with a few exceptions. But the automotive industry, they're just starting to. You know, you can see. I know there was a headline in the paper that GM is paid back or is paying their loan from the federal government, but they really are just starting to pay it. It's good they're paying back. It's going to take them a long time, though. $50 billion is a sizable loan. According to Wall Street Journal, $112 billion of the $179 billion in stimulus funds that have been paid out, that were paid out last year in 2009, went to state governments to plug the gaps in education, Medicaid, unemployment benefits, or to boost funding for food stamps and other social services programs. So the stimulus money last year, the majority of it went to bail out the states, because obviously there were large increases in all those areas. Unemployment benefits, obviously, the states have to pay, and social services, they just skyrocketed because of the conditions. And here you can see this political cartoon where Obama's looking at the state budget deficits, and the feds are saying, well, you wanted projects that were shovel ready. Here they are. It's not exactly what we envisioned when we were thinking of the stimulus building things like they did during the Great Depression, but that was a necessary expenditure. Federal debt, it's almost painful to watch. You know, this is from the Congressional Budget Office. You know, unless there's a change that is very dramatic, it's going to get to the range that will just be untenable. They're talking about that, you know, in 10, 20 years, if interest rates go back to the normal amount that they're at, 5% that they've been historically, that the government will have to spend 1/3 of its money paying interest on its debt. And you can see the size of these debts compared with our past history from 1969 onward. You know, they talked about deficits during the past. They're nothing compared to what they are now. This again, I believe, is from the Congressional Budget Office. and it shows what they project where the interest on debt is going to be the biggest part of the federal budget if we can't get it under control. And it's not a very happy cartoon here. The impact on New York State's been particularly hard. I remember a year ago I used this in my budget presentation, and the Buffalo News has got Adam Zygas's cartoon here about the governor presented a budget, and inherent in it, it was balanced by things which were like best estimates, which were really unrealistic estimates, which really left people with the understanding that down the road there were going to be some problems, that they weren't going to be able to balance that budget. And the governor knew that himself. A year ago he was talking about this massive deficit that he was going to be facing. But, at the time he thought he could use the stimulus money to balance the budgets going through to 09-10, and that we'd be able to handle it. It didn't turn out that way. It was worse than he thought. He also was talking about, in order to handle these types of situations in the future, raise the general fund balance from 3% to 10%. And that way surpluses that accrue as a result of his budget cap can be used to help address revenue declines in the future during times of economic difficulty. And it would help us avoid future fiscal crises by ending the boom and bust cycle of budgeting, which I think is very wise, but it's also politically something that is not going to happen in Albany. You're not going to see people be politically wise. They're not going to store money away for a rainy day because they're going to spend it. Adopting an explicit fund balance policy, according to the state controller, and budgeting to remain reserves buffers your finances against unforeseen risk. I agree. And provides a cushion throughout the fiscal year. I agree. That's very true. But it's really not going to take hold. We haven't seen it any real glimmer of it being something the legislature would embrace. It really isn't something I think is going to happen in Albany. This is from the New York State Division of the Budget. They just issued that in January this year, a study on where they see the projected general fund deficits for New York State go. And it's really not a pretty picture. They don't see them going down, and they see the cumulative amount over the coming 4 years is $61 billion. Now, we all know the pain was caused by the $6 or $8 billion that they had to plug, but this is going to be unbelievable if they can't find a way to balance this. And it's said that state budget woes will outlast the recession because you won't get the tax revenues back for quite a long time. The reduction in Wall Street bonuses alone cost New York State $1 billion in personal income tax. And you can see that there's graphs here too to show that. I'll go over those later. And it's compounded by the fact that we're losing people in New York and we're losing businesses. When will we return to normal? I can't answer. I don't have a crystal ball, but we can talk about the situation, and I don't want to be Chicken Little, but according to this man here who spoke at the National Governors Association, he sees 10 years going from December 2007 on of tough times. It'll take that long in his estimation for it to come back. Recovery, according to the New York State Division of Budget, will not get back to our pre-crisis levels of income until 2013. The problem is, between now and then, costs are going to rise. So I don't really know where we're going to be, how we're going to be able to do this if we have stagnant income or lower income coming in, and the costs are the only thing that we can control apparently, and that's why you hear and read about all the wrangling in Albany about cuts. Here's the Wall Street bonuses. Here's a graph of that, and you can see how they fell right off from $50 billion in personal income to 30. Doesn't quite make you feel sorry for these guys, but it's quite a loss in tax revenue to the state. And the capital gains tax, which goes along with when the stock market is booming, that took a real dive. So New York's getting hit here, and we've got unemployment above 8%. They see it staying up or above 7% through 2014, and that it will take until 2014 to reach prior levels of employment. School spending, you can see here where New York. This is from the congressional or the governor's budget team. They're looking at schools as if, well, they get more money than the average, and we can afford to cut them. That's their logic. So they came up with this slide here showing that they try to put the school aid reduction in context, showing that a 2% cut to school districts is really, not. They don't see that as being that harm because they've got, as you can see on the bullet chart to the left, they've got undesignated reserves, and they're going to give us mandate reform, which I really don't think is going to add up to a lot of savings, but certainly not what they're cutting. And they also provide this graph where they show that they've they put more money into education, and they just can't afford it anymore, which is kind of like, this graph of Frank Sinatra's life. We had a few very good years, but now those days are gone. And here you see the school business officers around the country. And that's the majority of the presentation there. I was tried to get, let's see. If there's any comments or questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we will conduct the question and answer session. If you would like to ask an audio question, please press 7# on your phone now, and you'll be placed in the queue in the order received. Please listen for your name or location to be announced and be prepared to ask your question when prompted. Listeners may also continue to type in questions through the chat window located to the right of the presentation. We are now ready to begin. So we do not have any audio questions.
Don't have any audio questions. I don't see any questions on the text button here that I'm looking at either.
Do you have any questions that typically come up when you give this presentation in other places?
I really, maybe Donna could come up with some, because I designed this for this presentation here for New York State ASBO. So I haven't done it before. I could imagine some of the questions would be things like, where did I get these facts? And basically, I got them, the majority of them, from either the Congressional Budget Office, the New York State Office of the Budget, or from various publications. The narrative of what were the causes of the financial crisis and what were the impacts. A lot of that information just is from reading different periodicals like Barron's Weekly Business Magazine and things like that. So I tried to document it as much as I could, but that would be what I thought of. I can see here's a question. Has anyone heard when state aid is expected to begin flowing again? Well, I heard that they were going to send a percentage of our June payment by the middle of the month. It's like it's trickling through late and underneath what it should be. So I've done what I would recommend other people to do is get a borrowing resolution ready, and I'm going to put it on the reorg meeting so that if I need to do a revenue anticipation note to get the school district through, I'll have that power to do it when the time comes. But I think it's also a big political football. I think the race for governor will be part of this football, and whoever is elected governor, if it's not Governor Patterson taking the helm again, I think they'll see themselves as being in a position where they have to solve this problem, and they have to give us reliable payments when we want to get them and when we need to get them. But I also see it as being a political football, and that the support that schools got in the past is not as strong as it was. That a lot of during times of crisis, I think people's priorities are more close to home. Even though education is very close to home, it certainly won't be forgotten. But being as big a priority might be a difficulty. So I saw that question. I don't see. Let's see. I don't see any others here.
We don't have any audio questions at this time.
Okay.
Kieran, there was a NIASBO report that came out just today, and it said that 60% of the state aid is going to be sent.
Okay.
And then whatever else will be sent is going to be delayed until the end of the month. And
here's a good question here that just popped up. If the state budget is not passed by the time we have to issue our tax warrants, any suggestions on how to proceed? Boy, that's a good question. I think that we faced a similar dilemma of flying blind when we did our revenue projections for the budget that was adopted by the voters, if the voters adopted your budget. And basically, I think you're going to have to do your best guess scenario. I mean, really, a lot of people have gone strictly with the governor's projection for next year, and that's a safe thing to do. Some people have prayed and hoped that they'd get a slight increase, and they put that in there because they didn't want to eliminate as many jobs as they would have had to, or they're putting off eliminating those jobs. There are no easy answers. There are no easy answers to that question, and really, there's no easy answer from anybody I've talked to about when the state budget might be passed.
And isn't that frustrating? My God, these people, they're just doing nothing at all. The Republicans haven't submitted anything. The Democrats aren't participating. It is not a good time. And Cuomo is the Democratic candidate, and now the Republicans are having their convention this week. It'll be interesting to see who gets their nod, but we certainly can't wait that long for a budget.
I don't know what choice we have in these times. It's the Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. These are interesting times. I don't think anybody foresaw things getting this out of hand, but really nobody really wants to handle some of the hard choices that are there. I mean, really, you don't have the money. Raising taxes is certainly not going to fly with the voters, and the situation we have here with the deficit is serious. So I had originally thought that The federal government would continue the stimulus for another year or two to bail out the states to keep them operating at their current levels, but there seems to be little will in Washington to do that either. So I think we're right at a standstill here in a lot of places.
And another scary thing is New York is not the worst state.
Right.
There's at least 5 or 6 other states that are in a worse condition than we are. So you're really wondering what they're doing and how they're trying to face it.
Yes, California is one. They've got they were hit very hard on a more personal basis. I think their people have suffered a great deal more, loss of home values, etc., than we have in New York. But New York, has the situation that when Wall Street gets hurt, it's a big blow to the tax revenue that Albany receives. So that's why I was saying, that it's affected New York State, the state government, more than maybe any other government. With the other states, they were running deficits to begin with, and this just compounded it.
Right.
And they also had serious problems before this whole crisis started with their pension funds being well underneath the levels they needed to be. Some states were issuing bonds to pay pensions because they didn't have enough money in their pension funds. So, New York has done some things well. Part of the reason is, I think the state controller's given that authority where he's in charge of the pension funds, and he hasn't really allowed people to play politics with that money. So that's saved us from one disaster, but it's a complex picture, and hopefully the people will say we're coming out of it in a few years rather than 5 or 10 years we'll be right, but it's not. We're not going to turn around on a dime, I fear. Go ahead, Donna.
No, we're not. When you were talking about the Wall Street bonuses, and at the time, almost everyone, unless you were employed by Wall Street, was thinking, no, they really should not receive those bonuses. But when you look at the effect of not having those bonuses, we lost out on all of that tax revenue and also that possibility of the spending that we could have had, then the revenue from that. Maybe that wasn't such a good thing, and we wouldn't be in so much of the situation that we are in.
And with the investment firms that went out of business, like Bear Stearns and Merrill
Lehman
Lynch
Brothers
was acquired on Lehman Brothers. That's revenue. You're never going to probably get it back to where it was because you've lost so many jobs down there.
Yeah. Michelle has another question. It says, were you surprised to see such a large percentage of budgets passed with these uncertain fiscal financial conditions?
I was pleasantly surprised, and I think a lot of the reason for them being passed was a lot of my fellow school business managers were wise enough to realize you have a fund balance to get you through the years where these unforeseen events will happen. And it enabled them to keep a combination of that, a combination of tough budgeting, was able to keep them afloat at a time when they knew they couldn't go to the taxpayer and try to get it all up back in taxes. So I think that I think it showed that the profession is very wise in its handling of money, that they were able to foresee this, if not foresee this disaster. They were able to foresee that such things happen, that over history such things happen, and that's why they were able to manage their way through it. I mean, either fortunately or unfortunately, I'm older, so I remember when, the governor was making cuts in the 80s to schools, so and local governments, and a lot of those cuts to some programs never came back. But I mean, it's something where whatever. I don't know whether it's human nature or what it is, but these things. Anybody who thinks that they're never going to happen again is usually wrong, and usually finds out the hard way.
You want to be careful of always and never.
Right.
You say always or never, and you're bound to be proven wrong by using either of those words, and particularly in something so nebulous as all the finances, and we're affected so by the global economies these days, more so than just our own state, and not even just the national economy. Look what's going on in Europe, and for once in the it's been 5 or 6 years now that the dollar has been very low in spending power overseas, and finally it's achieving some status only because Europe is now facing such a depression in many of their countries.
That's a double-edged sword, though, because that makes our exports more expensive to them.
Right.
So now, that's something which everything seems to have a cost. I mean, we all like to see the dollar be strong, but if that affects the sales of our exports, that's not going to help us get out of this any sooner.
Yeah. And we had a lot of Europeans coming over, and they thought it was wonderful. And for those tourist areas in our country that the Americans couldn't travel to, we had a lot of people from other countries coming in and spending money, which we needed. And now that's going to dry up. So you're right. There's so many double-edged swords here. And look at all the stimulus money that saved the variety of jobs last school year, and now many of those jobs have disappeared because of the way the economy is.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good time to, I feel, for the young people who, work hard to get a degree and are graduating now. It's like it was in parts of the 70s and the early 80s, where really the opportunities are slim.
Yes, very slim.
You feel for these people because obviously you can tell that they've been trying very hard and very long to make something of themselves. But I don't know anybody in this in our immediate area that's hiring. Unfortunately, maybe we'll have to pick up a few very skilled, specialized positions, but that's about it.
And how do you get that? If you're just graduated.
Right. Yeah,
and look at the young teachers that are out there. Some of them have been even employed for maybe a year or two, and now they're out looking. And do they stay in the profession or not? And that's going to be very difficult.
Even it used to be they could go to Las Vegas and get a job, and even there they're laying off. So I don't think there's any.
Yeah, Disney had a layoff for the first time. Yeah. So it really makes you wonder. You did give some advice as to what people can do. So you're going to ask your board to give you authorization to borrow if needed.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you, with your years of experience, that you can share that you're doing, or anyone who is participating today? Are there things that you're doing that are trying to help get ready for ending this school year and then beginning the next one?
I would say don't use up all your fund balance, because it's going to get worse maybe before it gets better as far as state aid goes, because once all this stimulus money is gone, it's going to be very difficult for the state to get us through this coming year and maybe even the following year without having to bear a lot of pain. So I think you have to. There's things, obviously I think we all know about it if we've been in the profession. We're trying to do it as painlessly as possible by not replacing in retirements, by trying to stimulate retirements through a combination of what the state will be offering and what we are offering here internally, and just be able to absorb a lot of this through attrition. But obviously, there's things which you need to buy, but we're going to ask people to live without having any new equipment for a couple of years, and similar things like that. You don't really want to cut programs. You really don't want to do anything that would hurt the kids. And if it comes to that, I know people will be up in arms if we have to do to sports what we had to do to sports, in the early '90s, and but recently Roy Hart, they just paid for the boosters did a fundraiser and were able to reinstate their football team for the fall. So there'll be more and more of that if we're not able to get by with what the state gives us, which looks like a increasingly likely picture here. I don't really know. If a new governor comes in, I know that they'll want to try to help everybody and as much as possible. But some things are going to be beyond their control too. So I could see it getting better, but it's not going to be over until it's over.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we just had the financial management auditing and accounting workshops on Long Island and Suffern and in Albany. And I know there are some of the Gadsby 54 rules that may be good accounting practices, but they're not necessarily legal according to New York State. So there's a discussion going on, or they're hoping to have a meeting that all parties get together and let's look at this, because this is not the time to have counter laws and counter rules that don't allow us to make the best use of the monies or the practices that can be helpful. So that should be interesting. So stay tuned for that kind of information to come out.
Yeah, that's always a quandary. I mean, there's accounting firms are self-regulating through Financial Accounting Standards Board, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, but what happens when state law contradicts it? You're putting in a hard place. Your auditors are put in a hard place. It's an odd situation.
Yeah. Now, Wendy Ashley sent in a question that says, do you see the new Medicaid requirements affecting school districts, and if so, to what extent?
Our Medicaid's been held up for so long. I don't know whether they could do anything more to it. I mean, I think I've talked to our special ed department about this, and really, we were never a district that tried to stretch what we claimed for. So I don't see it affecting us so much, but it could affect districts which were more aggressive, and or maybe they brought in somebody who was a third party who said that they could bring in or double their Medicaid revenue. I can see that affecting them, and because really in a situation like that, it was like a double-edged sword. It's like if you are not aggressive, you don't get as much money, but then again, you're not going to be subject to the scrutiny, or you're not going to risk having a large loss of that revenue. So,
yeah. Well, Wendy and Michelle both were at the Albany Financial Management Auditing and Accounting Workshop, where Jeff Foley from the Medicaid State Department talked, and their Medicaid is going to be doing a series of workshops around the state about this and how school districts can collect the monies and all of what happened and why the federal government is looking back for money from New York State.
Yes, that's. I forget which day we have that scheduled, but yeah, our special ed department's going, and
Yeah, so good. You
we'll
want to do that.
Yeah, yeah. That's always. Well, that's one more puzzle that you have to put together.
Yeah, and that's one where the special ed office and the business office needs to work closely together.
Yeah. If you've got a great special ed office, that's 90% of your battle, which we do. We've got a wonderful one.
Yeah, well, that's good. So, not using the fund balance to a great extent, but only when really needed to, having the permission to borrow, and just trying to keep programs in place are some of the ways that we can help in this financial crisis. But certainly thank you for all the research that you did on this, and I bet it's something that you're interested in, though, too, isn't it? Yeah.
I find it fascinating. I really do, because really, people like to oversimplify things to explain it as being this, that, or the other thing, or this. Put the blame on one person or one institution, and really it was like it became there's enough blame to go around. There was a lot of failures here, unfortunately, and in retrospect, obviously hindsight's 20/20, but if we learn from this, and if the government learns from this, if the accounting industry learns from it, if everybody learns from it, maybe we can avoid having this type of a problem in the future.
Are there any of the magazines or newspapers, newsletters that you probably subscribe to? Do you have any that you would recommend?
Yeah, I always read. It comes out on Saturday, every Saturday, Barron's, and there's a man who does the Up and Down Wall Street column, and he's been writing it forever. His name's Alan Abelson. He's got to be, I bet he's in his 80s. He's been around, he began his career, I believe, during the Great Depression. He's been around forever, and he's a very savvy person he was on to what was happening before it happened. You could see that these instruments that were being issued were not worth what people were paying for them. That he really brought that out in his column a good 2 years or 3 years before the worst happened. And his concerns are now, just to share them with you, if you wanted to know what he's on to now. It's basically things like the Chinese. He feels that the Chinese, especially their real estate market, is also in a big bubble type situation. That their government is very concerned about inflation, that their economy is so hot that inflation's becoming a big problem there, and that the government's going to try to stop it. And when they put the brakes on China, that will affect the rest of the world also.
Definitely.
And there's always the uncertainty there with this horribly vulnerable situation we're in with all this debt, that if the Chinese stop buying our debt, it's going to make us have to pay much higher interest rates to sell it, because they own whatever it is, $1 trillion or more of our debt, that they buy the bonds that are issued by the federal government. So it's something which it's a great idea to bail out companies and to stimulate the economy, et cetera, but it also comes with a corresponding danger when you have to issue so much debt to do that.
Right. So the Barron's newsletter that's online
Mm-hmm.
that comes out on Saturdays. Anything
Well,
else?
it's online, but you have to subscribe to the
okay.
magazine.
Mhm.
I just pick it up at the supermarket. I get it.
Mhm.
Wegmans has it. Tops has it. They get it every Saturday morning. And aside from that, that book that was mentioned earlier, the Irrational Exuberance.
Mhm.
That's certainly a good book. It was based on a statement Alan Greenspan made about the Chinese market in the late '80s. It was going up, and their economy wasn't doing that well. And he said, when things happen like that, things keep going up on their own. It's like an irrational exuberance. And he said that on CNN, and the next day the Japanese stock market plunged. all these other markets around the world plunged because he used that phrase, but it was
Right.
an accurate assessment that people
Mhm.
it was like a herd mentality. People were buying because everybody else was buying, and like they said during the Great Depression, that people will keep buying until there's the last guy in, and he buys it, and everybody else gets out, and he's stuck with losing all of his money.
Mhm. All those pyramid schemes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for
You're welcome.
attending, and hope to see some of you at our annual conference, which is June 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then the next webinar in this series is on June 11. So thank you for attending. Have a great week, and look forward to seeing you at some point.
Yeah. I'll be at Saratoga, so if anybody wants to tell me correct my grammar or anything, I'll be there. You can come up and talk to me. I'd be glad
Great.
to meet you. Great.
Glad to see you.
Okay.
Okay. So, Heather?
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.